Next up, we have Sruthi Gurudev and Joe Wilkins, and they're conducting a session called The Role of Youth, EcoJournalism and Ocean Conservation. Sruthi is a National Geographic Young Explorer who leads a youth-based e-magazine called An Hour in the Deep, which is about ocean solutions. Joe is an environmentalist with a background in ecosystem ecology. He studied that at university and is currently studying for a Master's of Science in Environmental Change, Impact, and Adaptation. And he holds a couple of roles as Conventions and Policy Officer at Reserva, co-leader of Reserva's Run for the Rainforest Campaign, is head of campaigns at UK Youth for Nature, and is also a member of the Global Joint Youth Task Force for World Environment Day 2021. So lots of great stuff that I anticipate in this session, and I'll hand it over to you guys.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having us. Let me just go ahead and share my screen so we could get to the Google Slides, and then I think it should share now. Let's see. Present. Okay. Can everyone see? I hope so. Thumbs up if you can. Okay, great. Well, our session today is about the role of youth ecojournalism in ocean conservation, which is about how young people can harness the power of writing to make change in ocean conservation. So let's move on. I'm very happy to be your host and very happy to introduce my co-host, Joe Wilkins. We just got introduced, so I'll just skip past that since you guys know who we are already. Okay. So An Hour in the Deep e-magazine is an e-magazine that I created as part of my project as a National Geographic Young Explorer. And so what it does is that it empowers young people to engage in ecojournalism about the ocean. So it's forward-looking in its research. We're really interested in niche ocean topics, nascent technologies, ideas that are kind of up and coming that may not be as well-renowned yet. And overall, the e-magazine is driven by marine innovation, renewed environmental policy, and a need for diversity in ocean conservation spaces. And so there are 5 subsections of the magazine: ocean solutions of the future, ocean conservation, ocean science, ocean storytelling, and spotlight. Spotlight is pretty unique in the fact that it's all about kind of ocean stewards and young people and adults who are making a big change in the ocean space, and it sort of interviews them to give you sort of a career outline and maybe a trajectory that you can learn from them. We publish articles, photography, and art from youth all around the world, and in an effort to sort of bridge the dichotomy between science and storytelling. And that's really what ecojournalism is all about. It's about how do we bridge this artistic side of writing and the science side so we can move people to make change in ocean conservation. So just want to let you guys all know that the door is fully open to contribute. You can email me in my email below, sruthigurudev@gmail.com, or just DM me on Instagram at sruthi.gdv. And then there's the link, anhourinthedeep.com. If you want to just go check it out, please go check it out. And that's our logo. I'm really proud of it. A very awesome artist from Austria created it, so it's really great. Okay, so let's get into what ecojournalism is. So ecojournalism is focused on the environment and climate change. What it does is that it intersects events occurring in the spheres of science, nature, and the environment with fields like politics and business. So it essentially deals with how environmental change affects individuals and the population on the planet. As we know, nature is voiceless. The landscape can't talk. The landscape can't scream. It only changes inexorably, and it's up to us as ecojournalists to recognize what's happening, make determinations about it, and then communicate that in a way that the public can easily understand. If you have one takeaway from what ecojournalists do, is that they speak for nature and they speak for people that are on the forefront of climate change. And a lot of you in the follow-up might be asking, so what's the difference between ecojournalism and actual journalism? So ecojournalism, it's simple. It's just that it reports on events of the non-human world. Okay, so now that we know what ecojournalism is, we can move on to the functions of an ecojournalist. So as ecojournalists, we act as the intermediary between the scientific world and the rest of the world. That means all the jargon, the technical concepts, they all need to be explained in a simple and concise manner so that the lay people can actually understand what's going on. Remember, it's not the scientists that we're trying to convince to care about the ocean and to care about climate change. It's just regular people, everyday people. That's who we're trying to get them to understand. The second function of an ecojournalist is writing in a very vivid way and with showcasing a lot of imagery. So it makes ecological issues a lot more accessible to people if you paint them a picture with words. So describe what the environment looks like, describe what's happening, kind of be as creative as possible to make the image very clear in readers' minds what's going on. And then the third function is researching both viewpoints of an environmental issue and reporting on it in an ethical and realistic way. We have to introduce both spectrums of the argument and provide facts and figures to support the direness of the situation. So as journalists, we can't blindly believe like one viewpoint only. We can't only consider one viewpoint. It has to be both sides so that people can get a better understanding of why the situation exists and what we can do to fix it. Science is very multidimensional, as you know, and so what one scientist believes can be, can be refuted by another scientist. So it has to be two sides. Okay, so my journey with ecojournalism all started with this one article. Deepest Dive Ever Under Antarctica Reveals a Shockingly Vibrant World by Laurent Balesta. And just to be clear, this was written in a 2017 edition of National Geographic. So it's there if any of you guys want to go read it. It blew my mind. As you can see, the images are just stunningly gorgeous. So I want to read a couple important excerpts from this article so that you guys can get an understanding about why it's so important and what we can take away. At depths of 30 to 50 feet, forests of kelp with blades more than 10 feet long create a sober, imposing scene. Further down, we meet giant sea stars. At 15 inches in diameter, they're much bigger than those warmer seas. Then come the giant sea spiders. They're arthropods, like insects and spiders on land, and they're found in all of the world's oceans. But in warmer waters, they're rare and tiny, nearly invisible to the naked eye. Here in the Arctic, the sea spiders can span a foot or more, yet their bodies are so small that their internal organs extend into their legs. You can see these just incredible otherworldly photos. Here you can see a sea spider on the right and then a sea star on the left. So let's kind of break this down and analyze what's written in the paragraph. In the first paragraph, Laurent Balesta creates an almost fantastical scene, but we know it's real. He's there and he's reporting on them. So he creates a sense of familiarity by comparing the alien life forms below sea ice to common animals we all know, like insects and spiders and sea stars that we see sometimes on land also. At the same time, he showcases their difference. The sea spider's internal organs extend down to their legs, which is just out of control. Like, you guys see that picture? So the tactic that he is using in his writing is he's trying to convince readers that might be indifferent or maybe uninterested that there is so much to be appreciated about such a hostile environment, that the minuscule life forms that are related to those every day that we see above ground. Okay, moving on to the next paragraph. At 230 feet, the limit of our dives, the diversity is greatest. We see Gorgonian sea fans, shellfish, soft corals, sponges, small fishes. The colors and exuberance are reminiscent of tropical coral reefs. The fixed invertebrates are in particular enormous. Well adapted to a stable environment, these plant-like animals grow slowly, but it appears without limit, unless something disturbs them. How? We can't help wondering. Will they respond as climate change warms their world? Paragraph 2 utilizes the same function as paragraph 1, the same gorgeous imagery. the same comparison of this icy ecosystem to a world we already know, the tropical coral reefs. First, by creating a sense of familiarity, Balesta puts this faraway Antarctic icescape in our radar. He compels us to consider it, to care about it. Before reading about this, I didn't even know a place like this existed. When I saw that the biologist had gone diving in extreme depths, I was like, whoa, there's like worlds that exist under Antarctica? Like I thought it was just barren wasteland. But reading this paragraph actually kind of makes me care about it. Like there's so much life that doesn't even exist in my mind that I can't even conceptualize. But here it is, and here he is reporting on it. So the second important function of this paragraph. So take a look at the last line. How, we can't help wondering, will they respond as climate change warms their world? The danger of climate change appears even more prominent because of the sheer remoteness of these life forms. It seems so absurd, especially to me, that this faraway world is also being impacted by climate change the same way we are. As we can see, the ecosystems that are seen or known by very few people, and trust me, not a lot of people get to dive these extreme depths in the Antarctic ice besides, renowned biologists like Laurent Balesta. But it's crazy that this all can exist so far away, but are so eminently threatened by activities of human beings who live just worlds apart. Even these tiny sea creatures are impacted by things we do. And it really puts into perspective in like a very subtle way how grave the situation is overall. Okay, so after looking at Laurent Balesta's work, what can we take away from a really great piece of journalism like that and to apply that to our own writing? So there are several steps that you could take. Describe the subject, its role in the environment, and its relationship with humans. That's the first step to writing an article. We need to first familiarize the reader with what we are talking about. Step 2, describe the issue at hand and how serious the situation is. This is pretty self-explanatory. The important part here is to not go into dramatics. We don't want to scare people. We just want to tell them the truth. Next, explain the cause behind the issue. Why is it happening? And then explain the solutions that are being implemented to solve the problem. 8, what are the repercussions? What are the complications? What are the drawbacks? Will we be able to cope in the long term? And then we can, as writers, forecast what will happen if the ocean solutions succeed, and what are the side effects that you anticipate. So we need to next display both sides of the issue in an accurate and measured way. So by presenting both sides, we add a nuance to the issue. So this is going to contribute to a more comprehensive understanding that the reader has about the issue. Only understanding the environmental side is not going to do us much good. We need to connect what's happening in the ocean back to society, back to politics, back to the industry. These three, society, politics, and industry, commerce, are the backbone of human society. That's kind of what makes our world run, at least sort of superficially. So for readers to build their viewpoint on these issues, on the environmental and the oceanic issues that we're worried about, we can't be biased, and we need to express the complexities of this like interrelation of topics in the most fair way that we can. Okay, moving on. So here's an example of step 5, what we had just talked about, comparing both sides and why that's important. So to us young people, this sounds kind of unequivocally bad. We might feel an urge to say, like, hey man, are you out of your mind? Why would you try to condone seafloor mining? That's just out of control, stop it. But the thing is, this is a crucial juncture. We need to talk about both sides to give people context. We need to explain why the situation is complex, which will help people start thinking about how we can solve the problem. Okay, so we know a lot of the disadvantages of seafloor mining, especially those of us in the ocean conservation space. So the disadvantages, not much is known about the devastating effects of mining. There might be more latent problems that will, disrupt and destroy unique communities of exotic life forms, such as those at the hydrothermal vents or the seamounts. And one of the results that's devastating could be that it could be the subsea equivalent of replacing an old growth forest with a field of dandelions. That sucks. Who cares about dandelions? The same way, if we destroy all of this, these exotic life forms below, we're never going to get them back. Sediment plumes could cloud the bioluminescent signals that creatures like the squid and the jellyfish use in the darkness of the deep ocean. And there are just countless more disadvantages to mining the seafloor. So why would we ever want to mine the seafloor in the first place? Sounds absurd. But when we think back to what I'd said earlier, business, politics, economy, and making money. Money makes the world go round. We know this. So what are the advantages? Avoiding the ills of land-based extractions and cutting the costs of renewable technology. A lot of times, what we can find in the seafloor, like polymetallic nodules, can sort of help renewable technology above ground. So it's a two-sided coin here. As it says below, batteries to power electric cars and to store wind and solar energy has upped the demand for seabed mining. And then third, this one's the craziest one in my opinion. Gold in international seabeds was worth at least $150 trillion, or 9 pounds of gold for every person on Earth. Like, that's inconceivable in my head, unfathomable. 9 pounds of gold for every person on Earth from the gold from the international seabeds. Man, I'm shook. So, and then the next is like helping economies of developing countries. So we know this is a double-sided coin because developing countries who have been absolutely ravaged by poverty, by colonialism, all sorts of outside issues that have caused them to be impoverished, can sort of take control of their economy and give people jobs by potentially mining the seafloor. And that's the tough situation. How do you convince people who really need money to survive that saving an environment that they never see and will never care about and will never affect their lives directly, how do we convince them? And that's what ecojournalism is all about. Okay, so these are the remaining steps, how to write a great article. So we went through steps 1 through 4, and we're at 5 now. So call to action, how can we get involved? Now that we've explained both sides, readers might be like, okay, why am I supposed to care about this? Like, what am I supposed to do? It's out of my hands. We as eco-journalists and writers need to give them a call to action, what they can do to feel like they're making a difference or just impacting the oceans in some way, shape, or form. We need to give them a means of getting involved. Next, we need to invoke a sense of hope and encouragement. So we have to remember that environmental change is a really, really sensitive topic for a lot of people and a lot of young people, especially the whole Greta generation. Everyone now that's just, there's like a fire under us, like, whoa, the world's burning, we need to do work. Emotions are running high with everybody. So if your article or your piece of writing ends in a note of dejection, it may implicitly put out a message that we are beyond redemption, that we are beyond help, like we're screwed. We don't want to say that with what we write. We want to make sure that there's a thread of hope, a last vestige of something we can do to save the planet and help the oceans. Okay, the next slide. Okay, I'm excited for this one because I'm going to turn into your English teacher and give you a bit of a lesson. So who remembers ethos, logos, and pathos? I remember that from English class like years ago. But as eco-journalists, ethos, logos, and pathos are really, really important components of what we write and what we put out to the public. Let's start with logos, the point of the triangle. So we need logos for the scientific components of a writing. So as I said earlier, we're not just writers, we're also communicating the words and the thoughts of scientists. So we need to do that strategically so that as many people can understand. We need to take raw data, scientific information, and technical components and convey them in a manner that a lot of people can figure out and understand. Because if you're talking in jargon and you're talking in complexities, that's going to make your article sound really smart. It's going to make you sound like you know what you're talking about. But at the end of the day, people are going to gloss over it, especially if that's not their background and they can't easily understand what point you're trying to make. Let's go to the next part of the triangle. Ethos. I'm out of breath here. Forgive me for that. So as journalists, credibility is everything to us. If people don't believe what we're saying, it jeopardizes the integrity of the entire profession. So we need to cite proper sources. We need to look into where we're getting our information and find out, is this legitimate? Does this make sense? Are the people that are coming out with this scientific information, is it based in reality? Is it solid, or is it just a bunch of dribble? That's up to us to figure out, and that's up to us to publish this to a wide group of people. So it also makes us, as it says, personal branding, and it makes our confidence heighten if we know what we're talking about is coming from a really good source. Okay, the next one is pathos. So if you guys remember pathos, so think about those animal cruelty advertisements that you see on TV. They really appeal to our pathos. That's where emotions come in. When you finish watching those, you feel like crying, you feel like overwhelmed, you're like, I need to do something. I need to help out. I need to give money to these organizations. So in our case, pathos is a storytelling aspect. It's a part of eco-journalism that applies to people's emotions. It's what we need to get them to advocate for the same topic that we are. As eco-journalists, we're not just telling news. They could, they could watch the news. We're bombarded with just negative headlines left and right. There are heaps of it. It's everywhere. But we're here trying to move people, not just tell them, hey, we're screwed, this is what's happening. We're here to call them to action, to advocate for the environment, to advocate for the oceans. Moving on, this, I think, infographic is really important because it gives us an idea of how the public tends to think about the ocean. First of all, people might be unaware of the problem. We need to remember that outside of our sphere, a lot of people aren't very familiar with ocean topics. For example, my friends not in the organizations that I am, doesn't even occur to them. They don't think about the ocean on a daily basis. And then on top of that, when we go to the next component, they see the ocean as a vast other world that's powerfully self-sustained. Because think about the raw primordiality of the ocean. It's massive, it's powerful, it's another world, it's like a microcosm. They're like, okay, what are we gonna do that's gonna impact the ocean that much? So it seems self-sustaining. That's a fallacy though. And then thirdly, people struggle to connect the human actions that we take with lasting damage that we're causing the ocean. So when they think about the problems, they become fatalistic about ever solving them. So they're like, okay, well, now that I felt, previously that the oceans are just this vast, inconquerable space, and now I see that we're impacting them, and we're doing a really bad job of taking care of the oceans. How am I going to fix the situation? We're beyond screwed at this point. But that's not how we want to operate with our writing and with our eco-journalism. The power of hope in eco-journalism is integral. So here's another quote by my favorite eco-journalist, Laurent Vallesta, and I will be quoting him quite a lot because he's a very good writer. So he said that people think that the Mediterranean is dead, that it's heavily polluted, that it's full of plastic, that it's overfished. And yes, in a way that's right. But there are still some incredible places in ecosystems full of coral and diversities. They're like oases, secret gardens. We counted 1,000 species in a square meter. For people who need hope to continue to do the right thing, it's nice to show that there is still life. Okay, so we can move on to now my co-host, Joe, so that he could talk and discuss how he communicates science. So Joe, just let me know when you want me to move the slides.
Yeah, can you hear me all right, Sruthi?
Yes, I can hear you. Sounds great.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, it's 4 a.m. here, so if I sound a little groggy, I'm just woken up again, but I'm really grateful to be here. And thank you, Sruthi, for inviting me to take part. So yeah, Sruthi has been talking all about sort of eco-journalism, but I think I just wanted to take a step back from that and talk about sort of communicating science in general and how, you know, some of the pitfalls or some tips. And I caveat all of this by saying I'm not an expert in science communication, but it's some things that I've learned along the way from a lifetime of studying science. Lifetime sounds like a long time, it's 22, but you know, science, if you talk to many people, is seen as quite distant and they don't really get involved. And I think that's a big problem that needs to be addressed in the coming years. And as it says in the second bullet point, scientists are very good at talking to other scientists. You know, when you get used to writing science or speaking science, you get used to using certain terminology or the jargon or writing in a certain form. So it's really important that we can then take that science and communicate it to the general public, to policymakers who perhaps haven't got the language or they haven't got the correct, you know, the terminology that we use, but they understand it's not, you know, I think quite often scientists are guilty of making the general public seem, you know, like they're not capable of understanding, but it's just the fact that if you try and gatekeep the science, then people aren't going to understand because they haven't had that training. So it's about trying to make it as palatable to people as possible. So next slide, please, Shruti. So yeah, some general thoughts, and Shruti has covered some of these a lot better than I ever will, but knowing your topic is a really, really important pointer. It sounds redundant and it sounds a bit silly, but if you're going to start communicating about a topic, it's really important that you feel comfortable discussing it. And the key thing is to do your research. This doesn't mean you have to spend hours trawling through, you know, Web of Science or Google Scholar, but it just means doing, you know, a lot of research. It means doing reading around the subject, even things that you think aren't directly related but may feed in. It really just brings that whole sort of perspective to your argument, kind of what Sruthi was saying earlier. But it's about, you know, if you're researching something on ocean warming, also look up topics on ocean acidification. Bring it all in, because they're all, when it comes to environmental change, it's all very much related to each other. So it's really important to bring in that sort of system-wide holistic view. And if you have time, it is sometimes best to look for the primary research and take the time to analyze it itself. Quite often journalists will put out, you know, some things saying like research has shown. They quite often put the link to the research. If you have time, do go and click it, because even if you read the abstract, sometimes it captures a lot more of the nuance than the journalists do, which they sometimes go for the headlines over the substance sometimes. Not always, but that, you know, comes down to the credibility and the ethos, I guess, of the journalist. So, and third is be analytical of everything. As scientists, we're taught to, you know, question everything, critical thinking. You know, it's droned into us to be critical of everything, and it's true. It doesn't mean, you know, look for faults in everything. It just means don't take everything at face value. You know, do look into it a little bit further. If an article says this, who are they citing? Who are they questioning? Which I know is coming up in a slide that I have an example of, so I won't go into it too much, but do question everything. And if it's a topic you're really interested in, I think quite naturally people are inquisitive and want to know a little bit more. So yeah, knowing your topic is a very important issue. So next slide, please, Shruthi. Oh yeah, so this goes back to kind of what Sruthi's been saying the whole time, and I called it know your enemy, which is perhaps I've gone for a little bit of the hyperbole here. I don't mean they're your enemy, but it means sometimes we are very guilty of only reading material that agrees with our point of view and confirms our beliefs. So it's quite often known as confirmation bias. It's we either only read material from sources we know agree with us, or if we read a new article, we kind of interpret it to agree with us. So it is really important to take a step back sometimes, and I'm guilty of not being able to take a step back. It's, you know, when it comes to things like oceans, and I'm sure, you know, the panelists, all the panelists spoken here, all the participants, all the attendees, it's really difficult to take a step back from something you're really passionate about. Which, when I say know your enemy, it doesn't mean you have to say, you know, start agreeing with all of them, but I think it is really, really important to understand the arguments that they're coming from. So, and if you want to get into a debate, it's really handy to sort of preempt what people are going to say. So I've given 3 sort of topics on sea level rise. You get the sea level has always changed, you know, which is factually true, but it's a very simplistic way of looking at it. You know, it's the rate of change. It's other issues that it's coming involved with now. You know, we live in very coastal settlements now, so situations are different. But if you aren't preempting that, then you can get a little bit caught off guard and you go, oh, well, yes, sea level has always changed. And then they're like, well, your argument's done then. So it's really important to sort of have that balance more for anything, just to be able to counteract it. You know, ocean warming, it will all balance out eventually, is something that I hear a lot. You know, oh, going back to that, the ocean is too big to change the ocean. You know, there's not much we can change the ocean, but you know, it's been shown that we really, really are altering ecosystems. We really are changing pretty much everything in relate to the ocean. And I'm keeping it very ocean focused because obviously this is the World Ocean Youth-A-Thon, but this applies to pretty much all environmental issues and possibly all issues out there. There's always going to be those who argue with you. Some people do it from a genuine, you know, they don't believe it, but some people like to play devil's advocate, which is something in itself. But and then the third one here I've got is deep sea mining, which Sruthi's already gone into, which, you know, I'm personally of the opinion that it's awful. I don't know how anybody could support deep sea mining, but it's really important that, you know, you have done the look, and people are justifying it, that they need critical earth elements and rare earth elements for renewable technology. But you know, if you're preempting that, you can say, well, we need to move towards a circular economy, which, you know, we get better at recycling, we get better at reusing, we don't throw away culture, you know, consumerism. So it's being able to preempt that means that you can plan for the questions, and that's a really great thing for communication. It shows that you've not only just read what you believe in, you've also read around it, you've read someone else's view, but you've also done the research then to counteract it. So reading, watching videos, watching documentaries, listening to podcasts, it's really, really important. The previous hosts were talking about podcasts. Podcasts are a really great way to learn in a way that's not just reading. It's, you know, issues of such like fashion. I didn't realize such a big impact that fast fashion has. So, you know, they all fall in. So, and like, yeah, my final point is it can be upsetting or irritating to read things that don't agree with you, especially when it's something that you really, really care about. And I wouldn't advocate for anybody to get upset. I think it's important to, you know, be aware of how it makes you feel, but I do think it is really important to read around the subject. So, yeah, next slide, please, Sruthi. Oh yeah, this was what I wanted to come to, is about the use of terms such as scientists, experts, and researchers. You know, always be critical and analytical. If someone is portrayed as a scientist or is quoted as an expert, be sure to, you know, look, if you have time, look up who they are, look up who this is something that I have to do for, you know, writing dissertation stuff, is find out who their funding is. Do they have any conflict of interest? And, you know, sometimes I have to do a deep dive on people. I'm not suggesting anybody has to do that, but it's, if you do a search on them, you can find some things about them. You know, scientists are still only human. They do have restrictions from funding organizations. And another thing is, just a title of doctor and professor doesn't always mean that they are necessarily the experts on an issue. I think sometimes we get very preoccupied by the title people have. And I think on issues such as ocean, you know, coral bleaching, there's people working on the ground in the communities that probably know so much more about the impacts of that because they've seen it. Whereas, yes, a scientist may understand the theory of it, or, you know, how the hydroxide free oxygen radicals and all that are affecting it, but it's a very different sort of knowledge, and I just don't think either should be discounted. And as a real quick sort of case study, there is quite a famous scientist from Australia, I believe, called Professor Ian Plimmer. I don't know if anybody is familiar with him, who is a climate change skeptic, but he's also holds the title of Professor Emeritus of Geoscience, and I can't remember his full title, but it sounds very, and he's a very eloquent speaker as well. He is very convincing. But if you look into, he sits on the board of many mining companies, he sits on the board of many fossil fuel companies. And then you have to question his views on it. I'm not trying to discount them, but you just have to bear that in mind, that he is a big advocate of, you know, the Earth's climate has always changed, and then that's his sentence, and he's very, very persuasive in how he discusses it. So that's just a caveat, is if someone is portrayed as an expert, don't take their word for it. Always be analytical. analytical is sometimes, it's, oh, it's a scientist, it's academic. It just means when you're reading an article, just be a little bit, is this genuinely true? If they're making very bold statements, then it needs to be, have a think about it. I think science is always quite nuanced in a lot of cases. So it's very important just to keep that in mind when reading. Next slide. I didn't mean to slam Ian Plimmer. He's the case study that comes to mind. And yeah, so next is knowing your audience. And as was mentioned at the beginning, I'm involved with sort of several groups, which means you have to communicate to a lot of different people. So with Reserva as the convention policy officer, I deal a lot with, say, policymakers or other NGO leaders. But because of who our audience is, I also have to communicate with quite young people. And it's two very different ways of communicating. Although the topic might be the same, perhaps, the creation of marine protected areas, the way you phrase it is very different. So it's and then similar to my role in UK for Nature, is mainly focused on politicians, but then with my master's course, I'm communicating with scientists. So it's very important to know your audience. It's the way you communicate, I think, is very important, and being able to adapt that based on the sort of knowledge, based on the understanding of your audience. To be able to do that is a massive skill. It's something that I'm working on. It's sometimes that I'm not, an expert on. I sometimes fail at it. I sometimes do go back to talking very scientifically just because that's not what I know best. But it's really important to be able to sort of understand that using terms, like polymetallic nodule benthic mine or whatever that is a very weird way of saying deep sea mining. It's and sometimes scientists are very guilty of overcomplicating for the sake of overcomplicating, I think. So yeah, that's bear that in mind. So next slide, please, Sruthi. Oh yeah, that was just, I finished that sentence already. So yeah, next slide. That's just, the message may stay the same, but just make sure you know how you're communicating, and get creative. It's all about eco-journalism, but journalism doesn't have to be writing. Sruthi is a very, very good writer. Whereas I'm personally not a very good writer, so I prefer talking or possibly making videos. It's more than one way to tell a story. So that's my basic point. Is I know this is about journalism, but some of the most powerful journalists use videos or use podcasts, use songs. Some people are very good at using songs and music to get a story across. So whatever your sort of gift is, use that. Next slide, please. This was just a quick example of the article that I wrote for Sruthi's magazine, An Hour in the Deep, and it was titled "Are We Facing Modern Atlantis?" And it was all about the topic of sea level rise. So I knew my topic was sea level rise, but I knew my audience wasn't other scientists or policymakers. It was young people who wanted to find out a little bit more. So it was really something I wanted to do. I wanted to do this for a while, was bring together the sort of fields of science, the fields of storytelling, mythology, and bring them all into a story. And it was quite I enjoyed writing it as a way to bring together, if I'd have said, oh, sea levels are rising by this much every year, and throwing facts at people, whilst facts are important, the ideas of Atlantis and the ideas of my local sort of Atlantis is Cantragwaelod, which is another case of sea level rise. And it's bringing those together, making it relatable, making it sort of visual. It's a really powerful way to communicate a topic that can be, first of all, very, very upsetting. The sea level rise is quite an intense topic, and it can be quite boring, for lack of a better word, just because there's so many numbers related to it. And it's really important that people realize sea level rise is happening now. This isn't an issue for the future. There's a really great quote, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, but it was like, if you're asking when sea level rise is going to happen, you're asking when it's going to happen to me. There's so many different communities around the world that are being affected by it today. So we need to make the world aware that sea level rise, ocean warming, ocean acidification, climate change, and all, it's happening now. It's not an issue for the future, it's now. So bringing that sense of urgency is really important. Next slide, please, Sruthi. My final slide, and then I'll hand back to Sruthi. But everything I've said here, I'm not an expert on science communication. It's just my own personal experience. So don't take my word for it for everything that I've said. But I am incredibly passionate about the ocean. It's always been a real big love of mine. Very, very fortunate to live in a coastal area, and it's always been a big part of my life. So I think hopefully that comes across when I communicate and talk about it with the oceans. But don't be afraid to work with other people, with different groups. You know, it when I first sort of left academia, it was after writing my dissertation. It's really important that you don't feel scared to go and communicate with young people. Communicate. You know, my dissertation was on ecosystem tipping points. Trying to explain that to 4-year-olds who were interested in what I was doing is, you know, it's a different way of communicating. And final thing is, don't be afraid to get things wrong, and then also don't be afraid to learn. So if you do your research but still someone corrects you, take it on board, and you know, don't take it that they're right and you're wrong instantly. But if it does turn out that, you know, maybe you misquoted it or something, don't be afraid just to, you know, okay, I was wrong, I've made a mistake, I'm learning. And I think that opens up a whole big world of opportunities then for people. So yeah, I'll hand it back to you, Sruthi, now.
You can drop some questions for Joe in the chat or me in the chat, and we can try to answer if possible. But if not, you can send us a DM, and we will make sure to answer. So yeah, before I go on, I just want to say there's one point of what Joe had said that I have to refute. He's a fantastic writer, and he's written a wonderful piece for An Hour in the Deep, which is all about Atlantis, as he mentioned. Please go ahead and read that in the e-magazine. The link will be at the end of the slideshow, anhourinthedeep.com, and it's fantastic. So thank you so much, Joe. That was awesome. So the next part that we're going to talk about is framing ocean topics. So how do we talk about ocean topics and frame them in a way that people will understand? One of the first steps of this is to explain and not assert. Explaining instead of stating or asserting invites people in to better understand an issue and see the solutions to the problems. When people don't understand, they often default to the idea that things are just the way they are and assume there's nothing we can do about this. We have some qualities where it's like a lot of people will just kind of take the easy way out. It's an issue, but it's not immediately in their face. And it's like, if you're asserting that, all this is going wrong, this is screwing up, like the ocean is messed up, people are going to shut down and they're not going to take it into consideration. They're like, well, I have one life to live and I'm not worrying about anything else but my own life. So we need to explain what the situation is in a better and more, concise, cohesive way. Then go into the value of values. So what are values? They are belief systems. Sorry, I went too far. So they are belief systems that we hold to be true in society and in our personal beliefs, and values kind of differ, but when you go into the core of them, essentially among human beings, they're sort of the same. So values tap into widely shared belief that we need to care about the planet. Not many people are going to disagree with you when you say we need to care about the planet, unless they're some kind of psychopath. They activate a sense of responsibility. When we feel like we're being held accountable and when we're held with responsibility, we feel like, hey, we need to make a change. Values decrease fatalism. As we discussed in the previous slide, fatalism is when you believe that the issue is way beyond the scope of being able to be handled, and it's doomed. It's like doomsday. And then the fourth one is it reinforces that our actions make a difference. So again, to reiterate, values remind people why they should care about an issue. So that really helps here because it connects with beliefs that we all share. Unlike facts or scientific arguments, they are difficult to argue against. So with science, as Joe had mentioned earlier, it's nuanced. There's different viewpoints, multidimensional people. One argument that a scientist will push might be like disagreed with by another scientist. But if it's a core value, a lot of people will be inclined to kind of share it. Okay, so we're headed up against like a little bit of a big checklist here of do's and don'ts when you write about the ocean. And this is from the Frameworks Institute. It's called like How to Talk About the Oceans. If you guys are interested, go ahead and check that out. It's really cool. So let's go with the do's. Explain problems by talking about them in terms of the ocean's health. So the ocean's health can be directly related to our health. when we understand we're sick, we're understanding we need to take certain actions to get better, to improve. The same way, if we talk about the ocean's health, it can impact people in a sense. They'll think, what are actions that we can do to help the ocean get better? And then the next one, show that there are workable solutions. What are workable solutions? We'll get to those. They're ocean solutions. They're solutions that are going to help these specific niche issues that are affecting the ocean. Next, connect your message to the health of the ocean and the implications for our health. So as I said before, the health of the ocean is inextricably tied to our existence and our success on this planet as a species. If the ocean is having a really hard time, guess what? We're having a really hard time too. So they're very connected. So we need to say, if the oceans are, the coral bleaching, if the ocean's at carbon sink, it takes care of a lot of the activities that we take for granted on Earth. So if the ocean, if something goes wrong, our life, goes wrong too. And then use words like we, us, and our to foster a sense of collective responsibility. So it's not just one person's fight. It's not just eco-journalism's fight. It's everybody's fight. Because guess what? Everyone lives, the ocean, the world is 97% water. This is everyone's fight. And then talk about change over time, how things have gotten worse due to action, but can be healed too. So the ocean that we live in, that we sort of interact with nowadays, is not the same ocean that Sylvia Earle in her heyday, or Jacques Cousteau, or very preeminent oceanographers from decades past have interacted with. It's changed, but we also have the capability of changing it. And then convey our shared duty to keep the ocean healthy for future generations. So when we all die, we're going to pass the Earth that we inherited off to another generation. So we kind of have to play our part to make sure the ocean is still in good health. And then be creative to bring these ideas to life in different ways for different audiences. This ties back to what Joe said. So make sure that the way you're speaking is connecting to the audience that you are trying to attract and that you are trying to market yourself to and target. And here, now we're going to go on to the don'ts. Don't simply highlight that there are problems. So this is going to cause people to get fatalistic, like, hey, it's too big, we're not going to deal with it. Don't talk about the crisis in our ocean without showing that it can be addressed. So we need to foster that sense of hope that I talked about earlier. Don't expect a purely factual and scientific message to cut it. This is also kind of connecting to what Joe and I were saying earlier. So just science isn't going to make people move. It's not going to make people actually take action. So going back to that ethos, logos, pathos, you need all three of those to make sure the ocean message is being pushed forward. And then the next one that I think all of us are guilty of to some extent is running the risk of sounding finger waggy. Like, how dare you? It's sort of somewhat what Greta has done in world stage, sounding a little bit finger waggy. As eco-journalists, our job is to convey the message and encourage people rather than shame them. Talk about resilience. This gives the impression that the ocean is self-healing. Don't do that, is what I intended to say. So don't say that the ocean is a resilient place, because to some extent, yes, it is. We can't lie and say that the ocean is not resilient, but the speed at which human beings and the measurable impact that we're creating isn't something that the ecosystems can bounce back from quickly. Don't pit the economy against the environment. This is what I said earlier. The world runs on money. Everyone is obsessed with it. So economy is inextricably linked to the ocean and the environment. So we need to find a way that addresses both of these situations, rather than say, we need to forget about money. Money means nothing. We need to care about the ocean. From our lives in, developed countries, easy for us to say, smug of us to say. But this is not the same case for impoverished, maybe developing countries that need that environmental boost to sort of, give them employment and stuff. So we need to have a sensitivity to that. And then I'm running a little fast on time, so I'm gonna speed it up a little bit. And then use alternative metaphors and values based on the idea of fairness. Fairness is kind of a tricky subject. What's fair? We don't know. So let's rather stick to the facts and maybe stick to something that we believe in, like our values. Okay, so I'm gonna rush past this because we are 10 minutes away from ending. So what is an ocean solutions? So this is kind of like genetically engineering coral. This is kind of like using tidal wave energy to power what we do on land. They're created to combat the various issues that affect the ocean. As I said, the MO, the modus operandi of An Hour in the Deep, is that ocean solutions aren't just ocean solutions. They're multidimensional. So there are always advantages and disadvantages to a purported solution. There's no such thing as a blanket. It's like we have an issue, but we found a solution, scientists have found a solution. It's not going to solve everything. It's going to solve maybe one component, but not the whole thing. And do we know enough about the solution to implement it? So let's talk about ocean solutions for corals. So let's take yourselves to the Great Barrier Reef, Cairns, Australia. We know that corals, the bond between corals and their algae is weakening. It's leading to coral bleaching. So there are 4 incredible solutions that scientists have come up with. 1, crossbreeding the corals to create heat-tolerant varieties, either by mixing the strains with a species or by crossing two species that would not normally interbreed. 2, genetic engineering techniques to tweak the coral or algae. So using like CRISPR to tweak the coral. 3, rapidly evolving hardier strains of coral and algae by rearing them for generations in overheated lab conditions. And 4, manipulating the coral's microbiome. For those of you who don't know what microbiome is, it's sort of like, you know, the dinoflagellates, the viruses, the fungi, the archaea, and the bacteria of corals. CRISPR. So there's a magazine that came out for Science Mag, and basically it's about successfully using CRISPR-Cas9, a gene editing tool on coral. So it sort of uses a method to make these genetically modified species. And CRISPR is kind of a tool to decipher the inner workings of coral DNA by knocking out, disabling the genes one by one. So the guy that's sort of behind all of this, Phil Cleves, hopes to identify genes that might serve as master switches, controlling how coral copes with heat and stress. Knowledge that could help researchers quickly identify corals in the wild or in the laboratory that are already adapted to heat. So that's kind of like creating a simulation to help these corals adapt to heat. But there are issues. This solution, what I've just said, might sound brilliant. It might sound like groundbreaking. Yo, we could do all of these 4 solutions and to help the coral bleaching incident. It's not that easy. It's not that simple. So what are the drawbacks of these solutions as ecojournalists that we need to express? 1, scientists found that breeding heat-loving corals to withstand the warming oceans have to avoid weakening other key traits, such as corals and how they cope with the cold. So introducing a new coral on the scale needed to make a dent on a network, as in increase the corals that are not bleached, on a network of 2,900 reefs spanning an area half the size of Texas, is a daunting challenge. Even in its damaged state, the Great Barrier Reef still contains hundreds of millions of corals, enough to swamp the genetic impact of new coral species. Second, since there's such an incredible diversity of the Symbiodinium strains that live within just one coral species, even if they were genetically altered, would it be possible to engineer enough of these Symbiodinium strains that compare to the diversity that existed before? So can we recreate that level of diversity that has been existing for now like tens of thousands of years? So that's kind of tantamount to a quote by Professor Dustin Kemp. If you clear cut an old growth forest and then go out and plant a few pine trees, is that really saving or rebuilding the forest? Well, in this case, we kind of don't really have that much choice. So we need to really analyze whether these solutions are worth it or what else we could do to fix the situation. So that's why the complexity exists there. So the final word. As eco-journalists, we need to uphold the truth, reflect science accurately, present both sides of the argument, and do our parts to be stewards of the ocean. So this is essentially what we've discussed over the last hour. So we need to tell the truth, we need to be accurate. We need to reflect the science that we hear, but as Joe had said earlier, we need to make sure that the sources that we find are credible and that we don't blindly trust scientists. We don't blindly trust anyone that has a PhD or a doctorate in something. We do our own research. We use our own brains, our own intelligence to determine, hey, are these sources that I am now going to publish, that I'm now going to create like an output to the public, actually doing a disservice, or is it is it accurate? And do our parts to be stewards of the ocean. This includes, so not just writing about it, eco-journalism is important, but do your part to be a steward, talk to people, spread the message out to people that may not just kind of be involved with the ocean, because our circles, a lot of us are superstars out here. We're doing work, we're getting in the ocean. We're part of coral gardeners, whatever. But the rest of the world, our friends, our networks, they might not be. And our job as eco-journalists is not just to cater to our own audience and our own circles, but it's to spread out there, to push forward and move to another. It's like networking on LinkedIn. Message a bunch of people, talk to them about what you're passionate about, and do that essentially. And so we are sort of now reaching the very end, and I have a little quote that I really like by Tim Winton, who is an Australian novelist, and he says, "Let's face it, you do 9 months as a freediver in your mother's womb. You belong to a planet that's mostly water. Your body is mostly water. I don't think there's any mystery. Why we would be drawn to it? I think there's some kind of ancestral yearning. We all came from water. It feels like home." So this is really from An Hour in the Deep. I know we have a couple minutes left, but from An Hour in the Deep, this is a great big thank you to everybody. So be sure to follow Joe and I on Instagram. Joe's absolutely superb. He posts a lot of environmentally conscious posts. And then I also am starting to post a lot about the ocean. And then do follow anhourinthedeep.mag on Instagram, because that's kind of where we publish all the updates. And feel free to message me, feel free to reach out to me, because I have no life outside of this magazine. So I will always be available to help you get involved if you are between ages 16 and 26. If you're older than that, that's fine. We can spotlight you in the adult section. And then get connected with me or get connected with Joe, and we will help you get involved with An Hour in the Deep magazine. We'll publish your work, we'll showcase your art, we'll showcase your videography. We'll really showcase what you do. And people are getting creative out here. People are doing embroidery. People are doing loads of people are doing little shows almost about the ocean. So in that vein, we're sort of at the end here. So thank you so much. Joe, do you have any sort of last words that you wanted to share? Because I know we have like 30 or so minutes left.
No, thanks for inviting me, Sruthi, and thanks to everybody here for organizing this. Really great. I've enjoyed keeping up to date with some of the events that are going on. It's been really great, and feel free to reach out for anything. If we're finishing with quotes, my favorite one is one by Arthur C. Clarke, that how inappropriate to call this planet Earth when it should be ocean. Or I may have got that quote wrong, but the ocean is such an important, and it is really something that Sruthi and I talk about a lot. It's the main focus of our conversations for the last 6 months or whatever. So do feel free to reach out, and that's everything. Also, just for any friends who I do share this with who are currently studying PhDs, I'm not trying to say that PhDs are unreliable. It's just I don't think they're infallible. So it was just a comment to just be sure to look into them and look into who's funding their research. That was my statement. I'm not trying to start any wars with PhD friends and postdocs. So that was everything. Just want to finish that in case they see this, and I've caveated that.
No, that's fully valid, and I think it's absolutely right. We're not infallible. There are a lot of different viewpoints, and sort of as really my parting word, and the other second modus operandi, the other MO of An Hour in the Deep is to find your niche, to get involved with ocean solutions. My background is in finance. I'm a numbers person. I'm kind of a math girl, not really, but that's what my day job is in. And I was for the longest time feeling a little worried about how am I going to get involved with the ocean when I don't study this, when I haven't gone to college for it. And when I live far away from the ocean, I used to live in Chicago, which is super city focused. And so it's to find your niche and get creative with the ways that you can get involved, because it's not just being an ocean conservationist isn't just being an oceanographer. It isn't just being a marine biologist. It's a wide umbrella of things, and there are always very creative ways that you can do your part. So with that, I think I'll pass this on to the moderators. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for that session. I really enjoyed it, and especially thanks to Joe for waking up at 4 a.m. We really appreciate that. Are there any questions from anyone before we move on? Anything at all? All right, if not, thank you guys, and everyone should definitely give them a follow and check out An Hour in the Deep.